What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Susanne Heiss, and we speak about playing with intent and what it means to define the texture of a team. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. Now, enjoy. Susanne, welcome to the
Miriam. Show. Thank you.
After having spent so much time with you, I'd never done before, and seeing you facilitate, I am super excited about this conversation today. Playing with intent.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Miriam. So fun.
Yes, and before we get into the deep dive, when did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
I actually do. So that's probably the easier answer. I actually do. I think that was pretty much from the start, to be honest, because I did a training on the Theory U by Otto Scharmer. And that training was called Facilitation for Change, or for, I don't know what it was kind of the end, but I know it was Facilitation for. So, and they called us facilitators. So I called myself facilitator. So I think it was really kind of right from the start. And it's interesting that you asked that question, and also that it's being discussed in the NDB community, because I never doubt that kind of, how can you call yourself differently? So yes, I would call myself a facilitator for culture and change. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. The conversation is always fascinating. And I recently heard a sentence that really resonated with me, that facilitation is a tool and not a title. On the other hand, sometimes we carry it as a title because we incorporate it so much in our lives, right?
That's true. And I even heard someone saying facilitation actually is a mindset. It's kind of how you approach the world, which I think, whoa, that's a big one. But yeah, somehow it's how you step into a group and approach a group, or the dynamic of a group, and how much do you let happen versus necessarily always steering or determining. So
what would be for you the core elements of this facilitator's mindset?
For me, I think the key item is that it is the unknown of the outcome. Yes, we're kind of steering towards a specific thing, like better collaboration or better something, but we don't put an outcome as such. I mean, yes, we have kind of our desired outcome. What do we want to achieve? But whether we achieve that in that one session, whether it takes a bit longer, because it's the team that kind of defines and co-designs that part. I think that's important for me. And I think it should be very obvious to the client, so that it's, yes, you can do certain things in those 2 hours or in the day or over the 2 days or whatever, but you don't necessarily know whether you will reach that target that he has or they have after a specific time. At least, yeah, that's how I feel.
Absolutely. Also because there's always this grain of uncertainty. You're putting a group of people together, so you never know what happens. And facilitation, I think, that's what I think, really focuses on the wisdom of the crowd.
Yeah.
Right? So the group knows already. So the specific output that they will generate,
is
unpredictable.
To a certain extent, it's really unpredictable, which is great. I think that's the fun part about it as well, at least for me as facilitator, because you can let yourself be surprised. And I think if you translate that correctly upfront to the client, then it also becomes more of a positive, because sometimes I think corporate clients, or at least those that I work with mostly, I mean, they want to know, by the end of this day, I will have achieved da-di-da. It's kind of like those KPIs almost putting against that. And I think if that is more obvious to what it may be or what it may not be, it's also a relief and Yeah, probably mostly a relief and kind of a breathing out moment.
Yes. If you're willing to give up this control and lean into this uncertainty.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. And one of your signature tools is play.
Mm.
And we, in our exploration call, decided that the umbrella of today's conversation is playing with intent.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear you speaking about corporate clients and KPIs and clear output. Where does play come into play in this context?
Yeah, I think probably not as obvious for the clients maybe as sometimes it is for me. I think especially with corporate clients, play can be very daunting, I think, somehow. And it's just kind of part of that non-serious business or non-seriousness of things. So I don't necessarily tell them that we're playing. It's really more the subtle exercises or activities that we do that invite them to be more playful. I probably phrase it differently as probably not so much as a play, but more as an experiment or let's try something. Or also, let's fail. I invite you now to fail, because the failing is more part of their speak. So I think, I wouldn't necessarily always say, let's play, because they're being surprised or shocked, maybe. Not surprised, shocked.
Words create worlds, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So by putting it out there, saying, okay, we're playing, then it's, no, we're adults, we're not playing, or we're corporates, we're not playing.
Yeah.
So what does play mean to you then? You mentioned that it means being open for failure, experimenting. Do you need any tools for that? Or is it, again, rather a mindset thing?
I think it can be both. So for me, play mostly is about learning, how I learn or how I learn to connect with people. So it's not necessarily the learning part as in the training, but really the learn to connect or the learn to be open, the learn to share, the learn to be vulnerable. So that part of the learning piece, I think, is very much for me in this opportunity to play.
I love that. It reminds me actually of how children learn is through play, or animals learn through play.
Exactly. And I think we're just that, right? We are kind of animals. We are children, hopefully still, and they learn through play. And I think it's that what I'd like to generate, that learning piece. And I think if you as a facilitator have that in mind, and that's probably where the intent comes in, because it's not just play for the sake of playing, because I think then you will lose the corporates pretty soon. It's not just, let's play taboo. And you think, why ever should I play taboo now? Well, maybe it had something to do with the communications piece that you're doing, or I don't know, but at least it should be that playing with intent, because you want to have a certain outcome, but more in the sense of a certain experience, that they really kind of are more open to share things or are more curious about each other and how they connect. So that's, I think, for me, what play is about. It's really about the learning aspect.
So does play then always involve a game?
Not necessarily. I think it can also be just a playful exercise and not a game. I mean, the question is, what is a game, right? Is a game where you really have kind of a paper and pen game with kind of like Monopoly or Taboo, where you have certain cards or really a specific tool, or is it also more of a playful exercise? So for me, play doesn't necessarily have to be a specific hardware tool. It can be also a very software exercise thing. I think it's important that it's that openness, that invite to try something.
And maybe you can give an example, and I would also be curious on how you actually do this invitation without being explicit.
Yeah, so I do use real hardware tools as well. So kind of an example for that would be the emotional culture deck, which I like to work with, which is a set of cards that have emotions on them. It's also kind of a play because you're using different senses as well. And I think that's also what play can be very much about, not just to use your brain, but also to use maybe more hearing or smelling or touching or some other senses. And I think as soon as the hands have something to do, it's a different level of how you process the world somehow. So that's why I also love kind of hardware plays or games. But the emotional culture deck is a great one because it helps people speak differently about how they feel at work or what they would like to feel. Or Lego series play is a great one because it allows you also to think with your hands. And that's very tangible and it has to be that hardware. On the software side, I like, especially now that we're going back face to face, I like an exercise either at the beginning or also after lunch where you kind of stand in a circle and you ask two people to clap their hands at the same time. So you really kind of clap your hands at the same time. And then one starts kind of giving that clap to another person, but you still have to clap at the same time. And that person that receives the clap then has to give that clap to another person, but also, of course, by clapping at the same time. And then so it goes round and round in that circle. And the idea is to start slowly because you need to figure it out, but then also to speed up with the clap. And then the next step is to move freely around the room and still be able to turn and clap with your partner. And it's a great kind of also energizer for the morning or for after lunch or in between as well. But the key thing around that more body playfulness is that you really kind of train the awareness, the presence of the group. How can I make an offer to someone? And is that person open to have that offer of the clap and receive that clap? Or maybe they're looking around something, so I can't give him that clap. Or the clap will be lost in kind of the nirvana. So the rhythm will be interrupted. So it's a great opportunity to debrief, but it's a very playful approach of how can you make people aware of being present or offering something or reading the other people's body of, are they willing to accept the offer? And that's, of course, to be translated back then and debriefed into what does it mean for your team? You know, if someone is not open to accept something, well, then the clap will be lost. It will not land with that person.
Yeah. So this nonverbal communication to see, is someone really aware and present?
Yeah. Do they see each other and really in the true sense of seeing? And can they reach out for help? Do they support each other? And that's, I probably would call it a game as well, but it's a very software game because you don't need a specific tool. But that's great for face-to-face things. And that's really kind of, especially, so kind of how I introduce this, really to, just let's get a bit more energetic. Let's pull up the energies after lunch or in the morning. Let's start slowly. Let's start just with a clap and get people involved. So I don't necessarily say, let's play a game.
Yeah. And what I hear is that what adds the intention, the intent is basically the framing and the debriefing. So to put it into a context.
Yes.
So we are doing this. Why?
Yeah.
We're doing this because we want to make sure that we align, that we listen to each other, that we're aware of each other, that we are embodying our presence.
Yes. And that's the intent that actually is carried onwards very often by the team then throughout the day. Sometimes they come back and say, that's how the clap gets lost or something. So they kind of reference back sometimes to that activity, which is nice because then it made people think differently about certain things.
And then the playing part is almost like a priming for the participants. So you put them into a certain state of mind and they will pay more attention to this sort of behavior.
Yeah. And that's why I think the intent is important, that you have to think about what does the exercise has to do or the game that you do, what does it have to do with the day or with the topic of the team? And that's, I think, so playing with intent is it's my intent that comes in. I need to carefully design that for the group to really make it sink and to really have an impact.
Yeah. And So I understand that there's a broad range of playing. So it can be very subtle, like the clapping game. It might even be more subtle where it's just about speaking. And then you can go into the extremes.
Yeah.
What is the signal from the group or from your client that you would receive in order to balance and to know what is the right degree of playing? How much can I trust them to move onward? And have you ever experienced that someone would say, oh, no, I'm not doing that. Clapping is for children.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so there are certain different things in your questions, I think. So one is, yes, clapping is for children. Lego is for children. It's sometimes that initial, I'm not doing that. I'm not being paid for doing that, right? Kind of in that sense of, that's not me. And then it's just to extend the invite and say, let's just try. Let's give it a try. Let's see how it goes. I think it's important that, especially if you have kind of a group of people, that everyone takes part. I think that's really important, that you don't have kind of the bystanders that are not involved, because that is kind of that leftover or that child that was never being asked to take part, right? So play is that inclusiveness of get the group involved. And I think that's what I like about play as well. It really needs to involve everyone. And so it has that kind of, it needs to be inclusive in that sense.
Also because, it makes total sense, because I think the discomfort of playing is that we might feel silly, especially as adults. So if everyone is playing and everyone is silly together, that's kind of okay. But if you suddenly have one observer, then you become aware of your silliness.
Yeah. And it has that status thing as well, right? If one is kind of observing, first of all, you don't have that brave space anymore to feel comfortable. Like you say, it's, can I be silly now? He's kind of watching me. But it automatically puts a hierarchy almost in the group of kind of the ones that do the job and the others that are more kind of like the outside observers. There are role plays, of course, where it's important to kind of have that dedicated observer, but then it's also part of that play, right? To say your role is the observer, and then you feed back to whatever you have seen. But that's a very specific part of the play. But just to say, we do now kind of clap the hands and one say, oh no, I'm out here. Then it's either everyone or you don't do it, or you pivot to something different.
Which is a very interesting part of a group dynamic. Right? So on the one hand, you have the opportunity to also flatten the room, from what I hear. Right? So, okay, we're putting the entire group into this playful moment, and suddenly everyone is the same because everyone is being silly.
Yeah.
And did it ever happen to you that someone would say, I'm not doing that?
No, not yet. Although I just had a group where I thought, that was probably at the, kind of corporate client at the edge of one person who was kind of a more, let's say, challenging person of the group, where I thought, oh my, maybe that's now the moment where that breaches and that kind of falls over. And then I would just have done something differently, I guess, maybe a less playful thing. So I think it is also coming back to your point, when I do, or how do I prepare the group, etc., or when do I know that I can do it? I think it's really getting to know the group a little bit. So I kind of also do the exploration calls beforehand to have an understanding of every team member and kind of the group. Of course, I speak to the client, which often is the manager, where I would definitely speak to the leader of the group to understand what's the dynamic of the group. So I think it's really coming to that point of how prepared is the group to accept a play. So it hasn't happened that someone kind of declined it, but you have to, or I have to have a certain set of exercises where I judge with the group, is that the right one? Or is it maybe something that is even more experiential, playful? Or is it maybe more of a safe exercise where I know, okay, that will work? So I think that's reading the room as a facilitator as well, reading the group, reading the room. And I prepare, of course, with the kind of, I speak to the manager upfront. I speak to every team member upfront in the exploration calls to understand how are their kind of their minds working, to understand that. But it's really, and also for the manager, it's really important that they take part in that play as much and probably even as more openly as the other team members. So that's something I also need to align with that client upfront, or at least kind of make them aware that it's a bit or can be more playful, and how are they thinking about that, etc. Because it's really important that if the team lead is taking part in that group session, and it's not something just with the team members or something, that they really take part and are very vocal about, yes, let's do that.
Yeah. And what I hear, and you mentioned it, is they need to feel safe. So there is an aspect of psychological safety so that we can dare to play. What degree of psychological safety as a prerequisite do you need? Or is it even something that you can create through play? Or is it hen and egg, that the more psychological safety you have, the more eager everyone is to jump into play, and therefore they become even more safe?
It's probably hen and egg thing. I think as I mostly work with teams that are already kind of teams, maybe they're newly formed teams, or maybe they have been working together for a longer time, but it's creating that safe and brave space in that moment, especially now when we have the pandemic and it's either they're doing an online session, and although they've been working online for the past 2 years in various kind of constellations, they're one-on-ones, there are team meetings, etc. But doing a workshop online is also very different. And at the same time, also, if they're coming back face to face now, they haven't seen each other for 2 years very often. It also needs to create a new safe and brave space in that moment. And of course, on top of that comes how newly formed is the group. So are they still in their kind of storming phase, or are they already kind of in their more performing space in the sense of Tuckman's model? So yeah, you have to consider that, I think, as you design the session, whether it's playful or not. I think that accounts for every session.
And while you're explaining the different team structures, I obviously think of your brand, which is the texturalists. Mm-hmm. So if I understand it correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, different teams have different so-called textures of how they work together. So maybe you can give an example of what are these different textures that you see in teams. And I would be curious then, as a follow-up question, do you analyze the texture and then see, oh, for this kind of team, this kind of play fits better than another?
Yeah. So the texture, it's like a team culture. For me, texture is kind of a culture. And I think I like texture, and that's why the texturalists as my business name, because I think it needs to be almost tangible. You have to feel it. You have to feel the culture. You have to almost to be able to touch it. And I think the texture really, is it more of a rough one? Is it maybe then more of a competitive team culture? Is it a soft, warm one because you're instantly offering support and reaching out for help, etc.? So I think that texture, and that's where the visual image for me comes in. Is it kind of a woolen blanket, or do you want to feel like a woolen blanket in your team, or do you rather want to feel, I don't know, very airy and light and very independent, and then you have other images and other textures that come into your mind. So for me and the work and how I convey it to the team, it helps to think about a team culture as a texture. How would you like to feel? And again, I think it's hen and egg with, do I create plays because I know the texture, or do I use play and games because I know the texture, or is the texture also created by the means of something playful as an exercise? And also that can be both. Sometimes I know, okay, they are more open and they are laughing and, more of a fun team. So you can do different exercises for them. But also sometimes it helps to try through play to really create that texture for the team. So it's also both, I think.
I love how you explain it and make it tangible, literally. And it seems as if through this approach, then the team can really create an identity, something that they can relate with and maybe refer to even in their communication afterwards, right? So if they came up with a texture, well, another question. Is a texture something that can be built, or is it something that is inherent already? So it's basically below the surface and the team has to identify it and to bring it forth?
I think that's the same question as, can you create a culture, or can you just kind of use the culture that is there and refine it? And I think with probably every team, you have a certain culture. And I think it's, where do you put the emphasis? How do you zoom in to that culture? And do you then intentionally say, okay, this is maybe a part we want to let go of? So maybe these are kind of the little spikes in your texture that you would like to flatten or to let go of. And do you want then to maybe put more emphasis on the other side? So bringing something else in, or growing something, or looking more into a detailed woolen blanket or something. How is the fiber? I don't know. Depends on how they want to work together. But I think it's really looking at what there is and then being very intentional of, okay, where would you like to go?
I just realized how fluffy the word or the context of culture is, and how you facilitate this conversation through making it more tangible through the texture. Because I was thinking there's different sorts of silk even, right? Yes. So you have the perfect silk that comes out of a factory, and then you have the handmade silk where you have the little mistakes, but they are part of the experience. So to what extent is a team or an organization willing to have these small hiccups or mistakes because it's part of their texture or culture, whatever that means? Or do they want the perfect one?
Yeah, exactly. And also, if we not just think of texture as a fabric, textile texture, but also in nature, like a leaf, kind of a leaf that is starting to unfold. It's still, kind of in a very, I don't even know the word for that in English, but soft and it's still very fragile. But then it unfolds, but you still see kind of all the various veins and little things of the leaf. And also if you put it against light, if you kind of don't put it against light. So how does that also? So I think there are lots of textures out in nature as well that you can use as a symbol. And which plant is it even? Is it a cactus? Is it a rose? And the rose has the thorn as well, if it's not overly, which I don't know the word in English right now, overly grown. But yeah. I think it's also that, how would you like to go about as a team? And that aspect helps. And sometimes I do bring in very actively the textures. Sometimes I don't. Again, it also depends on the team and what they need in that moment, just like the play.
Yeah. It almost sounds as if it is a play as such, but also a tool to facilitate the conversation about culture.
Yeah. Yes.
And then starting even at the first point, oh, now I see the complexity. Are we actually using the metaphor of nature? Because even the leaf, as you explained it, yes, it starts very soft and you can really shape it. So you fold it and it unfolds almost automatically. And then it dries out. And if you try to fold it, it just falls apart.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and I think it's similar with the play and the playfulness. It has to be that intention behind of using it or of going in a certain direction, and not just putting it on it because I like textures or something, but really kind of making it work for the team and for the customer, just like with the play. I think that's for me, the important thing.
Yeah, the metaphor needs to make sense and resonate.
Yeah.
Hello, listener. Are you tired of listening to my podcast voice praising our sponsor Session Lab in each episode? I think it's time to pass the mic over to you. So if you are as much of a Session Lab fan and user as I am, please share your experience and praise, and don't be shy of add a sentence of self-promo. Send me your soundbite and you might hear yourself on the next show and find your name and URL in the show notes. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.